Good morning. My name is Andrew Meehan, managing partner at Pangaeum, and I'm pleased to introduce our next panel, Border Security and CBP's Competing Missions. Today's panel is going to be moderated by Nick Miroff. Nick covers Homeland Security and National Security for the Washington Post. And worth noting for today's conversation, Nick was a part of a team at the Post that was honored as a Pulitzer Prize finalist for an exhaustive investigation into the fentanyl crisis ravaging families across the country that tracked the import and distribution of the drug and the government's efforts to address the epidemic of addiction. We're joined today by Kevin McAleenan, Chief Executive Officer at Pangaeum. Mr. McAleenan is a near two-decade veteran of the Department of Homeland Security, having served as the Acting Secretary of Homeland Security and the Commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Tina Mendelson, Principal at Deloitte. She advises government and public sector clients on strategy and complex transformations in nearly 30 countries. She's currently leading teams in support of Homeland Security clients focusing on border security, trade, travel, and immigration. We're also joined today by Jonathan Fleming, President of S2 Global, which provides screening solutions to customs agencies worldwide. And prior to that, Jonathan served as the Chief Operating Officer at TSA. Last but certainly not least, we're joined by Diane Sabatino, Acting Executive Assistant Commissioner in the Office of Field Operations at CBP. Ms. Sabatino leads more than 31,000 employees and oversees an annual operating budget of $6.5 billion. Ms. Sabatino brings over 25 years of experience to the role, having served as the Director of Field Operations in Miami and Tampa, one of CBP's largest and most complex operations, encompassing 19 airports, 12 seaports, and 3 cruise ships, three of the largest cruise ship ports in the world. A graduate of Fordham University and a degree in sociology, Ms. Sabatino also graduated from John F. Kennedy School of Government, senior executives in National and International Security Program in the Department of Homeland Security Partnership for Public Fellows. Please join me in welcoming her to the stage.
No, good morning. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. Not intimidating at all, sir, to be sitting right next to you on the panel with the experience that you have, but grateful, some tremendous partners to be working with today, certainly ongoing efforts. I think looking back over the last 20 years, really CBP is situated in an incredible position to really have the leverage and reach that we have throughout the industry with so many former executives, people who built the agency, built the Department of Homeland Security, but also with our partners in the industry that help us build the capabilities today. Kind of looking at where we are today from the perspective of the threats that we're dealing with, I'm not going to say they're the same as what we encountered and why we are the agency that we are, but we continue to see evolving trends and emerging threats. Frankly, working directly in partnership with the industry, really focused on that national security mission, but also international security and global security. We would not be able to do it solely as an agency, Customs and Border Protection. It really is the tremendous partnerships that we have that enable us to do what we do every single day. And I think we'll get into some, great discussion today, really talking about looking back 20 years. We didn't know quite what the capabilities were going to be 20 years down the road. But we were building that vision, and I think certainly many of the people in this room, certainly the folks up here, a part of building what that vision is. And today, ultimately, what we're responsible for is building the vision for the next 20, 25, 30 years. And again, look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It's great to be here. Andrew, we've come a long way since the days when you were yelling at me during the Trump administration. Again, I think this is an extraordinary moment. As Andrew mentioned, last year at the Washington Post, I was part of a team that spent the better part of a year reporting on the fentanyl crisis. And, we were, I think, thunderstruck when we, realized that more than 100,000 Americans were dying each year from drug overdoses, with fentanyl being the main driver of that epidemic. And, for me, with my focus on the Department of Homeland Security and CBP. We spent a lot of time looking at the challenges, in particular facing the Office of Field Operations and the struggle to get the technology up to speed fast enough in a way that it can start to make a difference in this crisis. And stepping back for a moment, because I know this conference is often focused on some of the more specific challenges of the DHS mission, I'm hoping that this conversation can go somewhat more broad and to really step back and look at what an extraordinary moment this is for CBP. We have, in the last couple years, seen Mexico emerge as the United States' top trading partner. And facilitating that commerce is obviously a fundamental mission for the agency. At the same time, we've got record numbers of illegal border crossings, and we have a public health and social crisis created by the threat of fentanyl and its devastating impact on U.S. communities. And CBP is really at the center of that storm. So I'm hoping in our discussion today we can get at a number of these topics and really step back and see where the agency is going, what are the areas that it needs to change and evolve to meet these threats. And I think I just want to start by asking you, ESC Sabatino, if you could talk a little bit about some of the challenges of last few months as we've seen record numbers of crossings force the closure of pedestrian ports and commercial ports. Is the Office of Field Operations coping with this challenge? Is it ready to meet this challenge? What does OFO need in order to be able to meet all of these different mission challenges?
Well, I think certainly it doesn't start at the ports of entry. And the investments that we're making as an agency, as a department, I think, as the U.S. government, really looking towards certainly what the root causes are and what's driving these. I think any capability that we have, I think we've seen certainly the tragic events over the last weekend. All the technology in the world can't prepare you unless you have the intel and the information to apply the technology, to the threats that are emerging. In terms of the posture that we've taken, yes, we have had to make some adjustments and really flex in terms of our commitment of resources to support our colleagues in the U.S. Border Patrol to ensure that we have, safe and humane processing of individuals that are crossing in between the ports. From the perspective of adjusting resources, it's an ongoing assessment as to, where we're going to move our resources, to attack the threats. In terms of preparation, the technology, I'll bring up the CBP1 mobile application. I think, frankly, in the media, it's got a bit of a bad rap because of some of the challenges, that we've had with misinformation and disinformation. But what it's enabled us to do is to get advanced information on people who are coming towards our ports of entry, something that we lack in our land border environment, that we frankly benefit from in our air and maritime environment. And as we're evolving through and responding to the emerging threats today, I think this is where our lessons learned are captured, because kind of a final frontier for us in the terms of advanced information is we're going to be leveraging the experiences we gained today to look to see how we can apply that to all of our environments, but specifically in the land border. How do we get advanced information from all travelers coming to our land border ports of entry? So again, taking the posture, leveraging and flexing the resources. I think going back to 2005 with Hurricane Katrina was really the first test as an agency. Our director of the Office of Anti-Terrorism at the time transitioned very quickly, and I think that's a benefit that we had, learning those lessons very early on, that we could tap into skill sets across the CBP enterprise and frankly beyond CBP into the DHS enterprise to respond to emerging and evolving threats.
Where are we on the deployment of these NII systems? Where do things stand, and how are we going to know if OFO is really making a difference? Because we've seen fentanyl seizures just in the last fiscal year nearly double, and yet the reports from DEA and HSI tell us that the retail level price per tablet on the streets of Seattle or San Francisco is now less than $1. So can the deployment of these NII systems make a difference in that supply, and where do we stand on that deployment?
The deployments are underway through 2026. We have a number that have been completed, a number that are construction projects today, and breaking ground in the next couple of months on a number of additional projects. But again, the NII is just one tool that we have. I think 27,000 pounds of fentanyl interdicted in fiscal year 23 for all of CBP, mostly at ports of entry. I think in terms of what that is going to do for our officers, really any of the technology that we deploy, and including the artificial intelligence that we're going to partner with the NII technology, because of the massive number of scans that we're going to now need. We're not going to staff our way out of that. But it's just another tool in the toolbox. And really what the goal of having these tools is to arm our officers, our frontline staff with the best information possible so they can make judicious decisions more efficiently and more quickly respond to what we see as additional emerging threats. I think as far as is it going to help? Absolutely, because it's going to allow us to take our officers and put them to do what they do best, which is to talk to people and determine intent and build situational awareness. And going back to what I shared earlier about kind of that intelligence and information, that's where the value and seizures are incredibly important. We remove them from the illicit supply chains. We disrupt the funding to the TCOs, but the seizures are really important because we can apply resources to look at the information and really do the forensic, dissect those seizures and build out better information to work against the TCOs, better build out those networks. So I think it's one tool. It's already proven to be incredibly beneficial where we see the NII that's been successful. We're only going to build on that success, but also we're going to see other threats evolve. Look, our adversaries are pretty sophisticated and adept at identifying what we're using in the fight and working today on ways to overcome and adapt those, and that's what we have to be prepared for. That's where the benefit of having these tools is, and again, it goes back to that information.
Kevin, you have a little experience with some of these issues.
A little bit.
You actually have a unique advantage. You were dealing with many of these same challenges in your tenure, and now I think they're significantly worse. Could you talk a little bit about what you have observed in terms of the challenges facing the agency, and what you think the agency needs more of, and then and maybe less of?
Sure. No need to make me feel older than I already do. I've got 2 teenage girls who take good care of that. But it's really good to be here, especially with you, Diane, but with Homeland Security professionals, Jonathan, Tina, and obviously I think one of the most astute journalists covering the Department of Homeland Security and CBP, maybe too closely sometimes for my comfort when I was in office. But really big and important question. And it's actually Diane reminding me of the response to Hurricane Katrina. Just a quick note there, she said, as director of the Office of Anti-Terrorism, you were asked to coordinate the response in terms of the assets for Hurricane Katrina. That's an example of very quickly a multi-mission kind of overlapping responsibility that's happened at CBP from day one. And the exciting and also challenging aspect of U.S. Customs and Border Protection is you get lots of new missions, but you never get to unload any missions, and the resources don't keep up. Taking it from a maybe 30,000-foot view, just thinking about my friends and colleagues at CBP in the last several months. The last panel talked about the Uyghur Forced Labor Protection Act and the challenges and importance of implementing that. 6 months ago, that was really the central focus of multiple offices in the leadership team, and obviously including field ops. Ongoing, as you've been reporting, Nick, the focus on fentanyl and several new interagency operations spearheaded and led by CBP. So if you talk to Acting Commissioner Miller a month ago, 45 days ago, fentanyl is the first thing and main thing on his mind. If you talk to him 14 days ago, he's refreshing shutdown plans and bringing his executive team together to worry about who's exempt, who's non-exempt, refreshing our essential, non-essential activities, looking at can they actually have support personnel travel to the southwest border to support the officers and agents that are processing unprecedented migrant flows. That's not a trivial issue. Washington's dysfunction impacts mission every day, and taking the entire executive team to focus on shutdown planning is disruptive. That's a mission that they had to address. 7 days ago, they're looking at a resurgence of migrants crossing the border, and especially families. Over 100,000 families last month. The one thing that I've tried to explain in terms of just how much different the challenges are now on the migration flows, you can talk about 300,000 a year during Napolitano's tenure as secretary to 3 million last year. That sounds like a big number, but the number I've always focused on is, well, the thing that's saving them is they haven't had a huge surge of families yet. We had 90,000 in April of 2019. Well, they had over 100,000 last month. So that one saving grace, that is the most challenging and sensitive population to take care of in a processing situation at the border. So they had that to worry about over the last 7 days. And then over the weekend, the devastating Hamas terrorist attacks in Israel. And you better believe the leadership of CBP was in the office adjusting targeting rules, thinking about how to address potential threats here, travel back and forth to the region, how to support our Israeli allies in addressing the threat, identifying U.S. citizens who might be there and who might need help coming home. So that was their weekend, and Sunday night, I imagine, in putting those in. So these things all just layer on top of each other. And I think in congressional oversight, great journalism, we ask hard questions of why aren't you doing all of this perfectly? No agency could, but I can tell you that they're trying every single day with challenging resource issues, with law and policy that doesn't always support them the right way. It's an amazing team there. So if I might just outline at the high level what they've been asked to do by the American public, by Congress, by the executive to carry out these missions, it's immense and it's very difficult.
I mean, when I think about that moment in early 2019 when we were in El Paso, and you said that CBP had reached a breaking point, and that was amid that record surge of families with extraordinary needs. What is different about this present challenge? We haven't seen. I mean, obviously the pressures are enormous, but we haven't seen that kind of crisis this time around. Could you talk a little bit about how CBP has evolved since then to be able to cope with so many more children, in particular, in its custody? And is there a new breaking point given the current capacity limits, and how close do you think we are to it?
Is that for me or
That's for you.
Diane? So
as an outside observer.
Yeah, I did announce that we were at the breaking point in March of 2019 in El Paso. It did get worse from there. What's different now? I think three big things. One, I think there's been a mindset shift and an acknowledgement at the CBP leadership level, and especially in the Border Patrol, that the cavalry is not coming, that Congress is not going to fix the legal system, that other agencies are not going to do their job at the speed that CBP needs to operate to protect migrants going through this process in their custody, and that they need to own this and make it happen. I think that's one. Two, I think the resources have improved, have significant supplemental and additional budgetary resources dedicated to migrant processing. When we put up soft-sided facilities for the first time in 2015-2016 crisis, we had like one in South Texas, in RGV sector, Rio Grande Valley. Now they have, 7 major soft-sided facilities, and the smallest is larger than any that we had on the border at that time. Very different resourcing. And I do think in terms of the medical effort, let me talk about that for a second. When we had the first crisis of families, and really at significant numbers in 2014, there was very little medical capability on the border. In 2016, we had 25 contract medical professionals. Now they have over 1,000 available every day, protecting and supporting the process at the border. So resources have been a significant effort. Also, I think CBP's leadership has stepped up and pressured other partners to do parts of their job, finding facilities, additional grantees for unaccompanied children to move through that process more effectively. Diane can't say it that way, but CBP stepped up and led. They've gotten additional resources, and some parts of the structure have been pressured into performing to help them in a slightly better way. But all of this is not accomplishing any real mission. I just want to point that out. I know we're not for attribution here, especially with you, but none of this is accomplishing.
I think this is a public forum, but go ahead.
A security mission right now. It's a regional crisis, really global if you think about where the populations are coming from, and they're basically keeping people safe while they cross the most dangerous part of their journey. That's what they're achieving.
Can I just add quickly?
Please.
I think where we are today, really, there was a foundation of, and some really hard lessons, but lessons learned from specifically that time frame that are being applied today. I think the medical resources and the significant investments in that, and not sitting in a position where we think, oh, we're free and clear, we've solved all these problems. It is a constant grind to make sure that we are, addressing and assessing, the needs of individuals in custody. But a lot of that groundwork and foundation, and frankly, having the vision at the time that they did, proving our capabilities and building out the capacity, has really set us up where we are today. But again, we're going to continue to see threats, and we have to continue driving towards, resolving, what's ultimately creating these problems.
And some tremendous use of technology, I forgot to mention.
I have the next question is also about technology, and this is for you, Tina. I don't want to overlook the challenge that OFO is now facing, particularly in other ports of entry and in the U.S. airports. OFO is processing tens of thousands of new, asylum seekers arriving through the CHNV program. I always get those letters mixed up. And so I wanted to ask you, what role do you see technology playing in OFO's ability to play more of in the airports, to play more of a role in managing migration flows? And what global practices have you observed that CBP is a little bit behind on and could use to catch up and better manage those challenges?
No, thank you for this question. And maybe I would start by just stating how difficult the CBP mission is, the awesome responsibility that CBP has both for facilitating and enforcing, and sort of that tension between the two, and the magnitude of the mission that it's impacted in your daily operations. So while we're talking about the migrant crisis, we also need to understand that 800,000 passengers and travelers per day come through the ports of entry. So in that piece alone, that creates a lot of the operational resourcing and support that the OFO must provide. And that's where the focus of the technology can similarly be applied in. Like Sabatino, you said that you want to move the flow upstream, so really understanding what is coming, so before somebody actually comes to the port of entry. So if you're thinking about from some of the global experiences, how do I, at the time when I intend to travel, how do I process some of my visa applications, some of my biometrics that I'm sharing even before I enter into different types of systems, so that the CBP or other government agencies can validate, do the necessary targeting and analysis before somebody shows up at the port of entry. Example would be, which I think it's very interesting, our colleagues in the UK, pre-Brexit and in preparation for Brexit, since this was such a massive change for Home Office there, needed to completely reconsider how the non-UK citizens will normalize the immigration status. So in 6 months needed to build a digital first, which was at the time the first time, biometrics enabled, mobile enabled capability that would register over 7 million non-UK residents. And that was sort of like the moment, sort of the pivotal time when they started to say, well, how do we begin to use that as a model, not just at one time, and start to apply that to other visa cases so that we can both create an environment where we use the best technology that is customer informed, that enhances privacy within it, as well as allows and builds trust into the system so that the passengers and travelers are providing their data willfully so that they can have benefits in return. And by that, Home Office is also fundamentally seeing that the data that is coming in is able to prepare them better at the ports of entry. And now, fast forward, the platform includes, it's called the Future of Border and Immigration platform now, includes some 200 visa products, over 10 million visa applications are being processed. And the way, we spent some time yesterday with the CIO community here with from TSA and CBP. And some of the interesting way how that was rolled out was outcome-based app development and DevSecOps development, which is slightly different, that focuses truly on what is that unique value that we all agree with the government, that you can roll out and test out with not just your consumers who are traveling, but your officers and agents, because they need to get used to and adopt some of these technology, that it comes out in chunks and releases, because that is a hard piece as well. So we want to be very cognizant where our officers are as they're adopting those technologies. So I do believe making that future of travel more frictionless, that in return also provides security in the back end for our government agencies, is something to really focus on as well.
I'm curious, I mean, obviously there are a lot more people traveling, and we've seen backlogs grow at ports of entry at the border, as well as long lines at airports. Are people increasingly willing to provide more information in advance in hopes that they will be able to skirt some of those waits and those delays? I mean, what is the relationship between those two things?
Yeah, no, I think a recent survey of 10,000 consumers, 1,000 businesses show that in 21 countries that consumers are 90% of them aware that their data is being collected by businesses. But what is more surprising, 70% of them also believe they would like to share even more data for the benefits that they can accrue from those businesses, right? So there is a construct. All of us are sharing data. If you think about it on Instagram, because Instagram knows before you want to purchase something, it's already showing up in your feed, and you're like, awesome, I'm buying this, right? So it's sort of very similar in terms of convenience on one side versus security. And I think the notion of creating sufficient privacy so that the consumer has the ability of making an informed choice. And I think that's something yesterday we were talking a little bit about. It's about customer experience, but it's also about customer choice, whereby you can move from the on-point at checkpoint check-in and screening to more of a continuous monitoring. And with some of the examples in the government already exist, with security clearances, for example, when you get an interim clearance, and you can continuously provide some of your additional financial and other work data, almost like insider threat data. So if that is sort of a model in which we're going to have continuous monitoring, whereby whether we're part of the trusted programs, you will be willing to share some of the data because you will trust which agency gets data for how long, and in return you're getting more frictionless travel. There should be a world in which we'll be all want to be part of it.
Jonathan, I want to ask you about the NII systems that we're deploying across the border. You're working obviously with CBP as well as Mexican customs authorities and others. I think there's a view, and maybe in the U.S. Congress at least, that NII is going to save us, and that NII is going to start to it's just on the cusp of being able to really make a major dent in our ability to interdict fentanyl in particular, but also other narcotics and threats. So I'd love to know what your assessment is on where things stand right now. And then I want to ask about a specific challenge, which I saw while we were working on our project, was almost as soon as the NII systems were deployed in places like Brownsville, we began to see the smuggling tactics shift, and as everyone expected. But the ports of entry that are hardest hit by fentanyl, Nogales, San Ysidro, are seeing a lot more body carriers. What are the conversations around coming up with ways to use AI and NII to be able to scan people, like what we saw in Total Recall, right? The famous thing where the people pass in front of a screen. Is that in the future? Is that something that is even doable if this becomes a big challenge? So current state of NI and that type of technology, is it possible?
I think, well, let's just, originally, I think traditionally, NII over the last decade or more has really been focused on secondary inspection. So, when there was officer contact and there was other issues or there was some sort of data that indicated there should be a better look, NII was deployed to do that. And the way that NII is built and the interfaces are built, it's really sort of a one-to-one, we're going to scan this, we're going to look at that screen, we're going to make these decisions based on that imagery and whatever additional paperwork or threat we might have. And so that construct was exploded to say, well, if we could do a lot more of that, we'd have much better data, we'd have much better interdiction, and theoretically that's true. So I think not just U.S. Customs, but customs organizations around the world have moved in the direction of moving NII systems and inspection from secondary processes to either primary or pre-primary. So what you end up having then is a surge in NII systems that are deployed. The challenge with that is, one, staffing, which is obvious. So sort of a one-to-one staffing mechanism for all that technology is unattainable. And when you're sort of looking at it in a silo, so you're not sharing that inspection, the outcomes of that inspection with others that may be in different POEs that aren't being hit the same way. And so how do you deal with that information? So clearly, the immediate reaction is, well, we'll move to AI and sort of, one, reduce the amount of staffing that's necessary, make smarter, faster decisions without as much human interaction, and that'll be the way that we can sort of field NII and stay on top of the decision making and still make it all a benefit. And I think there's sort of that may be a leap a little bit too far too early, in that algorithms take a lot of data sets, obviously, to perfect themselves. And those data sets don't only come from the NII systems or some of the other user interface systems, ACE and some of the other databases that would provide you declaration information, et cetera, et cetera. All that needs to be converged, but also previous decisions made by other officers, maybe for previous crossings or at other crossings. So you have to put all that data together to really make good sense of it and to make the AI smarter and smarter and smarter. The problem is with these particular data sets, they're hard to come by. They're hard for industry to come by because mostly they're held by governments. And so a lot of the innovators have a hard time getting massive amounts of data, and it's hard to qualify that data. So you get, even if you get access to large numbers of inspection data or previous scans, for example, then qualifying those and separating the good from the bad to really neck down on where your AI should go is challenging. I think Tesla is a good example. Just the driver input data for their self-driving cars, never mind the sensor data, LiDAR, and all the other things that they're relying on, but just the driver input. So watching how drivers were reacting to situations and putting that into their AI development. They started out with, I think, 10 million sets of data, 10 million sets of driver data. Over time, they discounted about 9 million of those because they weren't good drivers. And so they sort of necked it down to 1 million, and they made huge advancements based on the quality of that data. And so that's something that I think, as you roll out significant amounts of NII, capturing that data, capturing the officer interaction, being able to determine whether that was a good interaction or a bad interaction, who are your better officers that are utilizing the technology, and then integrating that so that it takes it into a command center environment instead of a one-for-one type of one person on one system is where you need to go. So it's a huge leap to go from deploying a lot of NII, gathering a ton of data, to having actionable AI working on it. But that's the trajectory. Particularly with CBP, the mission is gigantic, and the amount of trade is huge. What we've seen in working with other customs organizations that are dealing with much smaller ports of entry and much lower volumes is exactly that. Integrating all that data set, training the operators so that all the operators are approaching it the same way, being able to ascertain whether those operators are good operators or need retraining, and then pushing that into AI development is easier to do in a smaller system, but that's sort of what we're seeing in a trend standpoint. You asked about pushing, solving one threat or the threat moving. A threat's always going to move, obviously. If you harden one thing, they're going to move in another direction. I still think that the POEs are their targets where they can move the largest amount of whatever illicit good it happens to be. And so you do need to harden those regardless of whether you're pushing that into body carriers or what have you, that will happen. And there's other technologies that you can attack with that may be a little easier to deploy. But these NII systems, I think, deploying them effectively, number one, converging that data so that you don't have to staff all of them, number two, and then gathering that data, qualifying that data for AI development, number three.
Are there any conversations around developing systems that would be able to quickly scan body carriers without exposing them to unsafe levels of radiation? Are those conversations starting in industry?
I think constantly. I think aviation sort of led the way there from an aviation security standpoint and what they're doing with those technologies that are getting a lot more sophisticated, a lot less intrusive. Again, the same thing there though. Typically those systems put out a lot of data, and then being able to filter through that data and look for the threat in that data has been a challenge. They have made big strides on the aviation security side on algorithm development for very specific and targeted threats, which I think will be adopted into sort of the more of the customs non-ABSEC space.
And to be clear, are you saying that the R&D side of industry needs better sharing with CBP, needs more data from CBP? Is that
I
an
would
obstacle?
say CBP specifically, but yes, I think the data that is achieved by NII systems is critical for AI development.
What's the obstacle to that right now?
Well, the data needs to be protected, obviously. You need to put it into a digital sphere so people can interact with it without being able to take it. And so, like a lot of algorithm development, you work with a very small set of data that can be controlled. That then limits ultimately the viability of the AI that's developed from it. So some way to achieve a larger data set or constant data sets being shared with industry to continue to hone AI is really important. But it's a constant challenge with securing that data so that it doesn't leak, so that the adversary you're trying to beat doesn't get access to it as well. So security is difficult with that.
On this topic of screening and targeting, Kevin brought up the number of people who are on the terror watch list or were special interest. There's been a renewed concern around that, especially over the last few days. So I wanted to ask you, ESC Sabatino, if you could, some of this is a Border Patrol challenge for people who are coming between ports, but obviously not all of it. And so could you talk a little bit about what CBP is doing to safeguard against those potential threats, and how the targeting capabilities that the agency has developed are going to be able to assist that effort at any port of entry and also in support of Border Patrol?
It goes back to the information that we have in advance. I mean, that is just a critical piece for us. And what we've really been doing, I think we have evolved, certainly our National Targeting Center, incredible capabilities there to identify threats, even emerging threats, forecast. Our intel resources, one of the things that we have asked for, investments in our intel infrastructure to really build that out. But what we have really been focused on, this, again, it didn't start recently. It goes back to, former Commissioner Bonner pushing the borders out, right? Going beyond the borders and working with our partners to identify, where we have gaps in information and where our partners, and these are our foreign government partners, where they have information that can be shared with CBP. Really important and critical for us to build those strategic partnerships, to leverage information where we have, like the lack of visibility into certain regions, frankly, in the world, to be able to forecast whether it's migrant flows, transnational criminal organizations, organized crime working against CBP. We're not looking at necessarily different organizations in our partners. Sometimes it's different threats that we're encountering. But in terms of the targeting capabilities, leveraging to the point that you made, with respect to the amounts of data that we have, exploring where AI can really help us. Obviously, we've, been subject matter experts in developing rules, and identifying targets. But where AI now, with the vast amounts of data that we have, not only can identify the threats, but frankly help us rule out what is not a threat. We can't divorce identifying the security threats we have from the work that we have to do. And Tina mentioned earlier, right, the responsibility that we have to ensure economic prosperity, that there's legitimate travel and trade, and without impeding that. Like, we can't create something, to enhance security and then stop commerce. We have to work hand in hand. So that's where, continuing to focus. And I think certainly the events over the last few days, it is another prompt for us to, again, go back, scrub what we're looking at, right? And do we have any gaps in the information that we're getting? And our National Targeting Center plays a key role in making sure that we are leveraging the information that we have, exploiting it to the extent that we can. And if there's an opportunity, I kind of want to touch on the privacy aspect of that. I don't know if you had another question that you wanted to ask.
I do, but please go ahead.
I think in terms of capabilities, especially when we think about targeting and information, the vast amounts of data that we have, when we're asked about what does CBP need or what should the industry build, I think more often than not that the capability exists today. It's could we use it, one, and should we use it, two? Because we have to take into consideration the cyber threats that we have, and so grateful to have the team that we have with the Office of Information Technology and CBP. They are incredible, at building out capabilities, but they are also losing sleep, as our CIO, will say, he loses sleep every night about the threat of cyber attacks. That's what keeps him up at night. So taking into consideration all of the vast amounts of data that we have to protect that data. We have to ensure public trust. We have to make sure, because it's going to be one cyber attack, right, that threatens everything that we do because we lose the public trust. But then in terms of, the capabilities themselves, like privacy. I mean, I see some of the technologies recently at an event, and I was like, wow, that's kind of scary. I don't know as a traveler that I would feel comfortable with that. But it's about making sure we are informing the public, doing our privacy impact assessments. How do we maintain the data? What do we do with the data? How do we delete the data? How do we transfer the data? Who do we share the data with? Making sure we are as transparent as possible in those spaces. So I think the technology can be there. It's a lot of the rest of the infrastructure that supports it in terms of the policy, in terms of the privacy, in terms of the cyber that has to be built. And we have to make sure that we are judicious and fair with that before, because again, I see some of the technology, that'd be a great tool to have. But as a member of the traveling public, I'm not sure I'd be as comfortable without knowing exactly how it's being used.
And yet, as people feel less secure, more afraid, in an increasingly chaotic world, they are willing to make compromises on privacy, right? I mean, we saw that after September 11th. Are we at a new moment, do you think, where this is maybe for any of you, where the world is getting so unstable and people are are increasingly fearful and are willing to enter into different relationships with the U.S. government in terms of the data they have. Do you guys think that's true?
I do. I think consistent just traveler surveys on a convenience level, much less a security level, have indicated they're willing to give up more information, biometric information, to have a more seamless and secure process through borders. That's globally. The consistent results, anywhere from 70 to 90% of travelers. I think that's only going to increase when you're talking about the security aspects. Could I pick up on 2 points from the last couple of questions? One, you mentioned that known and suspected terrorists encountered at the border. It's really historically very rare to have a KST encountered between ports of entry. I think our peak year during my tenure was 6. They're into several dozen at this point. Part of that is total volume. Part of that might be different populations. Venezuela is a very interesting source right now, especially after this weekend. Iranian threat network is very active in Venezuela. Hezbollah is very active in Venezuela. These are the kind of things that CBP has to think about while they're trying to protect people crossing the border. I think you just got a master class as well, switching topics for a second, from Jonathan on how to operationalize AI. It's really hard. There are several different steps to that. You can't just automated image analysis is really a tailor-made artificial intelligence and machine learning problem. But it doesn't just turn itself on and kind of, here's the software, plug it in, it's going to work. You have to have the right training, you have to have the right concept. And I do want to commend CBP on the strategy they're approaching. They can't deploy technology that's not mission relevant on day one. So they've got to approach this in a very sensible manner that's incremental. And they're taking that approach with use cases that are achievable immediately and then building from that. I think that's an outstanding way to approach it. But one quick thing from our breakout yesterday from the CBP CIO, Sunny Bagawalia, he was talking about 2 things that would enable him to more effectively iterate and innovate with AI. One was better procurement authority that allows him to access emerging technology much more quickly than the traditional acquisition approach. Having sat on both sides as a buyer and as a provider, it's really hard to provide good mission tech to the government, even when you know there's a need and you know you have the right solution. He's seeing that obviously from the buyer side. And secondly, the problem that you just talked about with Jonathan, access to data. Why is China the leader in key AI functions, facial recognition, for example? Because the government provides the data to their government-owned companies and they train on it. How do we provide that in a safe way with protections and in a learning environment where American companies who want to do this ethically and not scrape the internet for data can train algorithms to be competitive with the best in the world? Nobody can compete with U.S. companies on software, but if they have better training data, you can't really catch up on AI. So I think that's another legal regime that we need to put in place, along with all the implementing steps that Jonathan outlined. I didn't want to lose those really important points that he laid out.
Thank you. We're almost out of time, but if anyone wants to weigh in on this point in particular, I'm very curious to know if you guys think that we are falling that far behind on AI deployment in this context.
I'll speak. Just throw it out there. I don't know that we're falling behind. I think in terms of where we're looking at the business use cases and continuing to build out the strategy as we see opportunities to do so, I think it's finding through the right legal frameworks to apply the technology. And I think certainly in our targeting environment, looking at the opportunities to leverage, really looking at all of the vast holdings that we have, as I mentioned before, I think we do see in terms of the application in other locations where we're very grateful to look and take some of the lessons learned that they're going to have and apply them as we move forward in the space.
And maybe just to add on, CBP is already doing some of the non-FAR procurement and that are including in NII, which I think is really commendable as well, because they're really looking into partnering with the industry so that we might provide the right type of capability. So in NII specifically, the whole construct was with tech challenges and getting some of the data to then prove how the algorithms can do computer vision for the cargo and for the screening. And it was really interesting from us as from the industry to be part of it and really play with the data and then come up with sort of what is the high fidelity so that it might help the officers to then do either the secondary or take necessary steps. So I think that is already happening. So now it's just sort of how do we continue to do it at scale.
Great. We're out of time, but Jonathan, you got anything else to add?
I would say I would agree. I don't think CBP is behind, and the other customs organizations worldwide are grappling with the same thing on a smaller scale. I think World Customs Organization annual meeting is currently happening right now, and that's a big topic of discussion on most of the panels is exactly how to affect AI within NII and other passenger systems. So I think CBP is right there, just grappling with a problem that's larger.
Great. Thank you guys for a fascinating discussion.
Thank you.